on this computer. There we go. Terrific. We're off to the races. So let me introduce Michelle Antonisse, today's facilitator of MESCcares Out of the Field. Michelle is my colleague. I know her, love her so dearly. She is the manager of school and teen programs at MOCA, the Museum of Contemporary Art here. She's an educator at the Norton Simon Museum. And she also is a certified California naturalist, and she runs incredible, often in person, when we can be in person, programs that are into the field. So today is kind of a spin on that, that I've been to a couple of, and that really combine close looking, nature, art, meditation, and more to connect adults and nature. So that is a little bit about Michelle Antonisse, but I will pass it over to her and let her do a little bit more of the introducing of herself.
Thank you so much, Alice, and thank you, MESC, for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here. And yeah, just a little bit about into the field / out of the field, as it is now today being referred to. Like Alice said, this is just a space for us to all lean into plants and non-human beings. And I would also encourage people, we are going to be playing a little bit with some anatomy and looking at plant and flower anatomy today. But I think it's a really great opportunity to just notice the tendency or desire to identify species. So we're not going to really be doing that today. And I know that that might be uncomfortable for people, but it's just something to notice. And that oftentimes when we're asked to look at nature, the first thing is, what's the species? Great. So we're going to do something a little different today. And I would love it if we could do some introductions. And if you don't feel comfortable doing an introduction verbally, that's okay. You can always throw something up in the chat or just opt out. That's also fine. So if everyone could please share your name, where you are, either within LA or perhaps somewhere a little northern of LA. And if you could also share your relationship to flowers. So that briefly just share, you know, either I'm a gardener or I'm a botanist or I like them, but I don't know much, you know, whatever it is, just so I can get a feel for where we're at. I'll start. My name is Michelle. I am coming to you from Herman, Los Angeles. And I am learning a lot about flowers right now, but I'm finding, as with anything you learn, there's just more questions and more to learn. Yeah. So we can just popcorn. Anyone who feels like they wanna.
Shall we go next?
Yep.
So this is Chris and Mel and Tom in San Mateo, California, and I guess we're all pretty keen gardeners, so we're pretty interested in flowers.
Oh, we gotta unmute
myself. I also am in San Mateo. I know them. I'm here because of Chris and Tom and Mel. And I am a scientific illustrator, actually. So I'm very familiar with having to identify something before looking at it. But I noticed that in our neighborhood in San Mateo, there are just super blooms, it feels like. And so I've been noticing flowers. I don't know if it's because I have more time or if there are more flowers or if they just look better this year. But that's why I'm here, because I have been noticing flowers more.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alice. And those are my parents and brother. Yeah, I think I really like observing the natural world. And like Savita, I've noticed a lot of flowers and plants blooming and growing. And it feels like just even in my backyard and in my neighborhood. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited to look very closely at some today.
Hi everyone, I'm Kabir. I am in the Los Angeles area in South Pasadena. So super close to you, Michelle. I always forget how close we are. And yeah, and I don't feel like I don't know much about flowers of the natural world, but I really like them. One of the things that I've been doing as much as I can during quarantine is going to the LA County Arboretum in Arcadia. It's like one of the few places that's still open, and it's really beautiful, and I find myself just like drawn to certain flowers and peacocks, and so I totally, for those of you in the area, I totally recommend it as a like way to get out of your house and be far away from people.
It's a hot tip. I did not know they were open. Hot tip.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda. I'm coming from San Pedro, and kind of similar to Kabir, I don't know a whole lot about flowers, but I really do like flowers, and I wish I lived closer to the Arboretum because I think I would go there.
Hi everyone, I'm Lonnie. I guess I'll just echo people and say I don't know that much about flowers, but I've always found that they're part of, when I go to clear my head on a walk, it's like, either the smell or the look is always part of like that clearing of my head. I always notice them. That's all.
Hi, I'm Carolina. For work, I was learning a lot about plants, but I realized that I've never had paid attention to the flower parts of like plants of when they bloom. I mean, they're pretty, but that's about as much as I know.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, my name. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay. Hi. My name is Ruben. I am in the San Fernando Valleys, located in Sylmar right now, and like many people here, I do not know a lot about flowers, but I think we all recognize that flowers, are very symbolic and can mean a lot to different people and often bring a lot of joy. So that's where I take appreciation for flowers.
Hi, my name's Bengta. I'm coming from Mar Vista, and my relationship with flowers is pretty much a look but don't touch relationship, because I feel like I spend a lot of time begging them not to die. And I don't have a good sense of how, it's look but don't touch is how I approach it.
Great. So that actually brings me to something that I had wanted to mention in the introduction, was that I asked everyone to pick a flower, right? So some of you might have been like, what? Don't pick a flower. So I did want to kind of address that, because it's something that I do a lot of in my workshops as well, kind of this like sacrificial organism. Yeah, I think that I totally appreciate, and if you don't feel comfortable picking the flowers, but also I've thought about this a lot, and personally I just believe in the small sacrifice of one part of these larger organisms, the reproductive organs of these organisms, in order to build human relationships so that we might more closely tether ourselves to the plant world and thus save the plant world. And that kind of idea that that like building this knowledge through close relationships allows us to perhaps be better stewards of plant life in general. But I think that is also a complicated tension. So I just want to also acknowledge that, saying, oh, we'll go pick a flower, now we're going to appreciate it. You're like, I just killed it. But also know that that flowers are not in and of themselves an organism. You know, it is kind of the reproductive parts of a larger whole. But that said, I'd like everyone to just, let's take a moment with our flowers. So whatever flower you have is perfect. It might be big or small or, you know, anything, who knows? So many types of flowers. So you can go ahead and hold it or put it down somewhere where you can look at it. And I'm gonna lead us in a guided looking meditation. So before we start, let's just all get in our bodies for a moment. And the way I like to do that is just breathing in through your nose really deep and let it out. Let's do that 2 more times together. So breathe in, breathe out through your mouth. One last time. Okay. So you can always come back to your breath at any time during this meditation or at any time in your life that you're feeling overwhelmed. You can just notice where your breath is. Maybe you're feeling it in your nose, your throat, or your chest. At any time, you know, come back to that breath. That's the stabilizing tide, right? So let's just take a moment. And first, let's ground down. So wherever you're sitting, maybe it's on a bed or a chair or on the ground, you just go ahead and feel the support of the earth. It might be many layers below you. There might be a basement, who knows? So just recognize that you're being held, recognize that you're being supported by the earth. And just go ahead and breathe into wherever you're touching the ground and notice what it's like to be supported, what it's like to feel still. You can even imagine yourself grounding down into the soil, into the earth. Taking a moment to think a little bit about that idea of rooting. Being still and strong and in the place that you're supposed to be right now. So whenever we're ready, go ahead and just take a look at your flower. Notice what the first thing you noticed was. What jumps out to you? And spend some time with whatever that characteristic is. Now take a moment and outline that flower in your mind. What would it look like if it were just a shadow or a shape? Notice the edges, where the flower stops and where the rest of the world begins. And just go ahead and trace along the edges of your flower. Again, noticing where the flower stops and where the rest of the world starts. Take a moment to notice what other shapes are emerging when you look at your flower. Are you seeing geometry, organic shapes, curving lines, stripes? Are there elements of your flower that feel circular, pointy? Do you see ovals? Do you see tufts? If you are not touching your flower, imagine what it might be like to touch your flower. What does it look like it would feel like? Or maybe what does it feel like? You can pet the flower and see, is it soft, hard, prickly, fuzzy, sticky? Notice where the lightest parts of your flower are. What part of your flower has the brightest tonality, has the most light hitting it? Maybe there are several spaces. Maybe as you move your flower, that changes. Now take a moment to find the shadows within your flower. Find the darkest parts where the light is absorbed, not making it out to our eyes. Now go ahead and find one color within your flower. See if you can pinpoint one moment that has one color. Not a gradient or stripes, but one of those colors within all the changing colors of your flower. Just really notice that color. What does that color remind you of? What kind of emotion would you associate with that color? And then go ahead and find another color within your flower, a second color that's calling to you. Maybe it's really similar to that first color, a little different. Maybe it's a totally different color. What does that color remind you of? What associations do you have with that color? Does it feel warm, cool? Now take a moment and look for things that you might have missed. You've had a lot of guided ways of looking at these flowers, but there's some things we haven't seen yet. So see what it is that you haven't paid attention to yet. What part of your flower, what nook or cranny, what space haven't you leaned into? I think, what are you wondering about? So we'll take another couple deep breaths before we come back together. One more. Okay. So I'm going to give everyone a little more than 5 minutes to just write down anything that came up for you during that meditation. What were you noticing about your flower? It can be a drawing, or it can be words, or maybe even scribbles. This is just a space to reflect on that moment that you had with this flower. At this time, you can feel free to play music within your own space. I won't be sharing music today because we're going to put this up on the MESC website. We don't want to break any copyright rules. But yeah, music or not, just take those moments to reflect. Okay, so we'll slowly come back together. And this is the time of the great bravery of opening discussion in a Zoom platform. So it's okay if you don't feel comfortable to share here, but I always find that it's easiest to learn in a group, right? So what did people notice about your flowers? What was coming up for you, or what did you find yourself noticing?
Well, we chose daisies, which I always see from above. So I thought I'd look at it from the side. So I sketched the side of a daisy. So I thought it was interesting to me how long the stem was and how small the flower in proportion to the rest of the stem.
So I hear you taking this opportunity to really shift your perspective, and that also kind of had you noticing these proportions really differently than you would from down, right?
Yes.
And so what did you see that made you say that the stem seemed young?
Oh, sorry. Did I say young? I was thinking it was long. It was long in proportion to the...
Oh, okay, cool. I was like, I don't know how to tell with the stem's age. You got to tell me. How do I do it? Yeah, so a long stem, and also thinking about these flowers you maybe have seen very often and then seeing them from this new perspective.
I noticed something different. I liked it when you were saying, look at the edges. I like to paint, and so the negative space where the flower ends and the rest of the world begins. I thought that was quite interesting and useful from a painting or drawing perspective. And I liked it when you told us to look at the different textures of the flower, and I was prodding the center of my little daisy, and it was actually firmer than I thought it was going to be. It was quite hard, that little daisy, and of course the white bits, so you can hardly feel them when you touch them. So that was an eye-opener for me.
Yeah, so really also thinking about even the same exact flower and the same meditation, that these different things come up and are highlighted for different people, for each person's relationship to those beings, right? And that I hear you really noticing the formal qualities and the visual aspect of translating that object into like what that might be like to translate it. And then also the textures. Yeah, textures coming up. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Carolina.
I had a really nice rose, and it's the color's red, but on the underside it's kind of like a yellow. So I kept looking at the colors, and then I noticed that there are these little like bursts of yellow in the middle of the I don't know if you can tell, of the red, that kind of like, one of them kind of resembled like a little butterfly to me. And so I started looking for those little bursts and little transition between red and yellow.
Yeah, so yet another lens, really noticing and leaning into color, and like not only the overall color, but how there are these sort of moments of other colors. Yeah, Lonnie.
I'm not sure what kind of flower this is at all, but I was really noticing the kind of undulations in some of the petals, and I was also experimenting with looking at it from different perspectives, so I've rarely looked at the flower from the bottom like that, but kind of did so for the first time. And also noticed, I mean, it's almost completely white, except there are, I mean, hard to see, but there's like two random little pink dots, and I just started wondering all about what that was about. And then I noticed the direction of I think they're pistils, I guess is what they're called, all kind of pointing one way, which I would have assumed had something to do with the sun. So I was thinking about all of that. Oh, and the texture, a lot less soft than I actually imagined. I guess I was imagining like a rose petal, which is very soft. These are a little more papery.
Yeah, I hear you really synthesizing a bunch of these different lenses we've been talking about, noticing the texture and the colors, and then also kind of, I heard you use the word undulating. So thinking about the way this still object can also communicate almost a movement within the petals, having this sort of poetic movement to them. Yeah. Any last thoughts? Alice.
Yeah, I was surprised by my flower because it has this like very, very tough, like the bottom part to it. And then the petals are like emerging from it. And I really like the part where you said, oh my gosh, I just ripped off a petal. I really like the part where you said to explore or find something that you have yet to see. Because at that moment, it sort of looks like these petally parts would continue all the way down. But I think upon really close looking and sort of like finding the edge between, oh my gosh, I ripped off another petal. Okay, finding the edge between that hard bit and the petals. Yeah, it's just very clear that they're a lot shorter than I thought. So they sort of really start at that intersection versus like going all the way down as it feels like I would have drawn in my mind.
Yeah, so thinking also about that sort of internal diagrammed anatomy of the flower, which is a great transition for us to think about flower anatomy and see if we can look at some of those words that people use to describe flower anatomy and see if we can find those within our flowers, right? So what I'm gonna do is I think I'm just gonna share my screen and look first at a very basic drawing of flower anatomy, and we'll just have this same type of conversation, exploring that drawing and seeing if there are things that surprise you, things that you notice within your own flower that are coming up there, or maybe things that are confusing or seem bizarre. So anything that you're noticing, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. That's not the picture I want to look at. No, it's not. It is one. There we go. Okay. So here we go. Now I can see everybody in the flower. Great. Let's just take a moment and can everyone see this image here? Okay. So we're just going to take a moment and look silently at this anatomical drawing of a flower. So what's going on here? What do you notice? Yeah, Kabir.
Well, one thing I'm noticing right away is there seem like I'm looking at this drawing and then looking down at my own flower and just comparing it, and it seems like there are some things that I feel like I can identify on on my own flower, but other parts of it which don't seem like they're present on my own flower. So that's just like a noticing and a wondering I'm having.
Yeah, so thinking about this sort of space between this drawing of a like archetypal flower, you know, quote unquote, and how that even gives us space to maybe appreciate evolution and how different each of our specimens might be from this sort of basic or standard flower drawing. Yeah, so noticing the space between this anatomy and the actual like lived anatomy of our flowers. What more can we find? Any other thoughts? Yeah, Alice.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in the like how the stamen is broken up and how the carpel is broken up. And just that there are these, I don't know, just that there are like these further layers or components to each of those I find interesting. And there's kind of an interesting thing I feel like going on, maybe not to get too meta, but the anther and the filament are sort of this reproduction of a flower. It seems like, I mean, maybe I'm using the wrong term there of flower, but like the filament also sort of like seems like a stem, and an anther feels like a blossom or something. Oh yes, perfect. So just that these structures get like repeated again in sort of these like layers somehow within the anatomy of the flower itself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thinking a little bit about the ways that flowers are kind of fractal beings, and that they might have these repeated forms over and over again, that we're seeing this sort of stem and object at the top of the stem. And so how that might be, you know, the way when we think about so I'm just going to veer off of this sort of constructivist and talk a little bit about that idea. If a child draws a flower, a lot of times it might be a line and a circle, right? So that really basic shape and form is repeated over and over again in flowers. And what you just said reminded me, and what prompted me to ask a question. So we probably have so many types of flowers that we're all looking at. And I just want to share, some flowers are, all these flowers are going to look different from each other. And I wanted to show this picture as well. This is a way of showing some of the diversity of those forms, right? So I don't know if you're able to see something that looks like your flower, but the reason why I wanted to mention this is because Mel and Chris are looking at daisies. So daisies are ligulate flowers, right? They belong to Asteraceae, which isn't something you need to know, but the reason why I know that scientific word off the tip of my tongue and the top of my head is because it's a really special type of flower where we look and we say, oh yeah, those are petals, and then that's the middle. Where in fact, what we're looking at as petals are really evolved leaves, and the middle is made up of many tiny flowers. So that's the same thing with a sunflower, a daisy. It's called a composite flower. So what Alice was saying just reminded me, and what I just felt like I needed to share, because, you know, if you're looking at a daisy and you're saying, wait, I can't find a stigma, I can't find a pistil, it's because they are so tiny, because each little thing in the middle of your flower has the structure, the reproductive structure of a flower. Does that make sense to people? I know it's a really heady. It's crazy. So let's take a moment and look at this image as well. And I just want to ask people, you know, are you seeing something that represents your flower in there? Are those words representative of what you're seeing? Does anything come up for you looking at this image? Or even what's going on here?
Well, I have a rose, and I can't tell which one the rose would be.
Yeah, and I think Carolina has a rose too. So thinking, what is it? Where, you know, is it? So let's look at your rose together. Maybe we can figure it out together. Okay, so. Yeah. So let's go through. Saccate, lowest petal sac-like. I don't think so. Synthiform, like a bowl or cup shaped. Does that seem like it might be the right?
Well, I was kind of thinking that's the closest one. If I had to take a guess, that's what I would have guessed. Only because this one has a lot of petals, but certainly there are other, and you can tell this has been picked a while ago. It's starting to dry up. But when they start to dry up, they look more like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's correct or not.
Yeah, and you know, these are all sort of these are all, you know, cartoon versions of these words. And I'm not a scientist, so what serves my means is learning more words that just help us describe what we're seeing and look more closely. So in terms of that, it sounds to me like that cup or bowl shape could be the closest. So also the petals of the rose, are each of the petals separate or are they fused together? Like, could you pick a petal off, or are they all? Because I have oleander flower, and the oleander flower all the petals are one form.
Right. No, I think these are separate. I mean,
So those separate flowers, thinking about, you know, another thing to sort of look at in there, that maybe there are other words that could help us describe that. And that, you know, a lot of times if you do want to identify a flower, those are the questions that are going to be asked, right? You know, what's the basic shape? Are the petals fused? So how many people are noticing that their petals are fused? And what that means is that the petals are not separate. They are all one form, connected to each other. People noticing? Does anybody else have a fused? Not Alice, because those petals came off too easily. They are not fused. They wish they were fused to protect themselves from you. I know. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to go back. Actually, I'm going to look at a slightly different one here. So I think it's useful to look at a lot of different illustrations of the same thing, because like Kabir was saying, all of our flowers are going to be really different from this like sample flower. So in this illustration, what was called this area here, and I know Alice, you were wondering about that, saying, oh, okay, so like there's a stamen and a pistil, right? So the stamen, you were noticing, has that kind of flower shape of a stem and a bump at the end. The bump is actually pollen. You know, that's the male reproductive part, with the sort of pollen that would get into the pistil, the female reproductive part here. Ooh, just a little click. So I think it was called, this one called it a carpel, and this one calls it a pistil. Honestly, carpels and pistils are slightly different, but it's so confusing. Like, I don't even really totally understand, and I'm very sorry for that. Basically, you can have a lot of carpels in a pistil, but you cannot have a lot of pistils in a carpel. Okay, yeah, we can leave that. So looking at this image, is there anything that you're noticing that's sort of different, or that's maybe easier, harder to understand, looking at this different type of illustration? Or is it same?
Can we see both images? There we are, beside each other, or then we can compare them.
Totally. I think the best way is probably, there we go. There. Yeah, Alice.
Well, something I'm noticing right away is that on the left flower, the stamens seem to be a lot like shorter than the carpel, and that the carpel's like, oh, here I am. And then on this other one, they seem to all sort of be the same level. And I think in mine, they might actually be, it might actually be shorter. The carpel pistil thing. So yeah, just thinking about those different heights.
Yeah, and I actually just was looking at lemon flower the other day, I think. Oh no, it wasn't a lemon flower. I was looking at, I don't remember. I was looking at a flower, and I often try to find each of these parts in every flower that I find and see if I can figure it out. Because most flowers will have all these parts, but they might be fractal. So it might be within that tiny thing. And some flowers even have this huge petally cup, and you got to go way down into like a tube to even find those reproductive organs. So really thinking again about like evolution and how different each of these look, right? So what we're actually going to do now is a guided dissection of your flower. So let's start at the very bottom. Most of you, can you find a sort of, so sometimes people talk about flower anatomy as like a stack of cups. Like you can even see that here, that there's like the ovary in the middle, and then the sort of stamen surrounding that, and then the petals surrounding that, and then the sepals surrounding that. So let's go all the way to that outermost cup and see if you can find any sort of, they're often green, like little leafy things hanging on to the little butt of your flower. Can everyone find those on your flower? Do you see your flower? And Alice, yours might be that hard outer shell. That could either be an evolved sepal. So I'm just going to keep talking, and please let me know if you have any questions. So while we're looking, I'll just keep talking about each of these parts. The outside section, this says sepal. All of those sepals together is the calyx. That's C-A-L-Y-X. So that's that kind of cup. And then that cup has different little green, usually leaves on the outside. Those are sepals. Now, if you're going to go look at a bougainvillea, oh my gosh, Alice jumped ahead and found that we are looking a lot like the illustration. Wow. Yeah, so that's that outermost cup. Yeah. So that could be an evolved calyx, or it could be what's called a bract. And a bract is, sometimes you're going to find a flower that maybe looks like this, and it has like a little tiny hard like leaf on the edge, like boop, hello. So that's not really a leaf, that's something called a bract. It's evolved to do all kinds of things, to help insects get in there to pollinate, to catch water. So Alice, what you have there, that hardened outer bit, I think it's likely an evolved calyx, that outermost cup, but it could also be a bract. Is anyone familiar with bougainvilleas? So yeah, the red thing that the red or purple, Kabir, you have a bougainvillea?
I think so. I think this is one. Let's see. I picked, this was a dried one that I found on the ground, so it's like a little bit.
Okay. So that whole thing that you're seeing, that's the bract. It's not a petal. That's the bract. And then that little tiny thing against the bract, that's the flower.
The little tiny, this part here?
Yeah, that's the flower in there.
Oh, huh, okay.
Yeah, if you take that apart, you might be able to find.
Then I would see more, okay.
It's basically like a colorful decoy on a bougainvillea. It's like a big pink leaf pretending to be a petal, right? Not quite a petal. So is everyone able able to find sepals or a calyx or a bract in Kabir's case? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm just gonna take that right off of mine and move along. So the reason why, one of the reasons why I like to do this is that I love to go ovary hunting on these flowers. It's so satisfying if you can find the ovaries. You know, this flower is no longer going to reproduce. So I think its best legacy is to allow for education, right? So go ahead and maybe take a petal or two off so that you can get a cross section of your flower. Kind of like Alice did. Alice, I don't know if you want to show us on the show.
Crazy.
This is not so easy with a daisy.
I know, you need like tweezers
Oh,
and a microscope. You know, I took a botany class once and they did this. They gave us each a flower and we had to find each of the parts. And I totally got a sunflower, which is the same thing. It's like the flowers are in the middle and they're just like teeny tiny. So rude. So are people able to find some kind of line, some kind of filament with pollen on the top, an anther? The pollen, the anther has basically like, well, let me actually show you. So in this image, you can see the anther at the tip of the stamen. The stamen's the whole male part, right? So the male part is called the stamen. It has a filament and an anther. But I think it's easiest to just be like stamen, pistil, right? The stamen is the male part, long thing, and it has the pollen grains at the top. Are people able to find that in their flower? Did everyone find that? Yeah, okay, great. And are you able to differentiate one of those as the pistil? It will not have pollen, a pollen grain at the top. One of those little lines coming up does not have a pollen grain. That's the female, well, it's not the female genitals, it's the, yeah, there we go. Okay, Alice found it. Yeah, and so you can see the top of yours actually is green. It kind of helps us figure that one out. Yeah. And so that's sort of the entry tube. And if a bee or a grasshopper or a milkweed bug comes and hangs, I say milkweed bug because I have an oleander plant. Milkweed bugs love oleander. You can check out my Instagram stories. I'm like really engaged with those milkweed bugs. So anything that's going to pollinate, bats, butterflies, anything that might pollinate would come up in here, get some pollen when they're getting that nectar, right? And then go to another plant. The top of that sort of pistil right here, you can see in this drawing on the screen how it's kind of like, oh yeah, the pollen's just spilling into the female part. That's not actually how it works, okay? It's actually through pollination, so that needs the insects, the bats, you know, everybody, sometimes self-pollination, sure, but this is sort of like, I feel like this drawing is, okay, it's not that easy, okay? So are people able to find the female, the pistil, the one that looks different from all the other stamen? If you are able to find that, follow it down into the bottom of your plant and you should find the ovary. So the ovary is like just a tiny little egg there. There's only one ovary in each plant. It has a lot of ovules because when it's making a seed, it's going to have a lot of seeds usually, right? But yeah, if anyone can, this is a really hard thing to do. So this might be like, you know, assignment for later, like find another flower and see if you can get that ovary. Is anybody, I wish you could see it because it's like really glorious. Mine's cut in half. It's like two halves of this little egg. So it's just from following the pistil opening it up, and that's where the ovary is. Okay. Yeah, great. So here, let's take this over here. And then also, if you found the ovary, right below it's that receptacle, right? So are there parts that anyone found in their plant or flower that we haven't talked about? Is there something that's standing out to you? You're like, yeah, well, what about this big? What about this giant alien eyeball on my plant? Does anyone have something like that? Cool. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen unless people, I'll show one more of these reproduction drawings that I thought was cool because it's the same. Oh, it's so pixelated, just kidding. I will share this one instead. So yeah, this is just a basic reproductive cycle. And so this part here is what we were talking about and what we've been seeing in our flowers, right? And that's just, it works the same way as with all other beings. There's this fertilization, the seed develops. I had a botany professor once that told me that seeds are a suitcase for an entire life. And I love that idea because the seed has everything that will develop into the mature sporophyte, the mature plant, and that's ready to create more seeds, right? So if we look here at this simple fruit, it also can be like all fruit can mean any kind of thing for a plant, you know. That's what the seed is. You know, if you see something fruiting, that's usually seeding. Okay, so any questions about this before I close out that those images? Questions or surprises or wonderings? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna stop that share. Okay. Okay, so I just want to ask, as we're sort of wrapping up, did you find anything surprising today? Did you learn anything surprising? Also for me and personally, you know, were there things that worked and felt like aha moments or things that felt confusing? Any of those things? Let's open it up for the debrief. Any thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I love that I learned something totally new about bougainvillea, about the flower itself was so teeny tiny that I was only able to see kind of I was able to see some pollen at the top when I like pulled it apart, but that was kind of as far as I was gonna get. But I think I love that the meditation came first, and just like really looking closely at it, because I think I found myself drawn to that part that turned out to be the flower, and then having that combined with looking at these diagrams and getting a bit of information about the flower, like I feel like I had this discovery that tied closely with something that I like was looking at and noticing before already. So I really, yeah, I love the whole process.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I find that's often true for me in the natural world, that when I take a mindful moment and just experience something, whatever I'm drawn to is going to be juicy. There's going to be a lot in there, and to just kind of shoot from your hip feels really good, and it can be really satisfying.
Oh, I guess, and one more thing, the prompt, I love the prompt to think about secondary colors, like, you know, thinking about dominant colors and then secondary colors, because that was what led me to sort of look more closely at that part of the, or what is turned out to be the flower part. So I just loved, like, I love that pushed me to look more closely and find something new.
So yes, I'm going to agree with what Kabir just said. When you were saying, look how the way the light changes, and that was, for me, that was quite interesting. But also I was plucking up the tiny little daisy leaves, the little white ones, and on the edge of each leaf, and on the edge of each end of each petal, there's like a little almost like a little seed, but it's probably not a seed. I have no idea what it is, but I was surprised to find it there.
Yeah, and that's honestly, I don't know, and I will tell you that I think daisies are, I believe, part of Asteraceae, and that is a group of flowers that is notoriously wild to figure out the anatomy of. So I'm going to look that up and see if I can find something about that, because I know that people who are professional botanists often talk about, like, oh, don't even look at the Asteraceae, oh my god. So yeah, I'm going to do a little research. I think there's a podcast I listened to that had a whole episode on Asteraceae. Check it out. So yeah, I don't know, but I'm going to look it up. Awesome. Yeah.
Well, I just appreciated the chance to look really, really closely and to like rip apart a flower. And I appreciated what you said about, like, this is the one little sacrificial part of the plant, so that we can develop our relationship with this plant and maybe save more in the future. But I think specifically, I think that this is from a pomegranate tree in my garden. And so now I just have a lot more questions about it, because I obviously know what a pomegranate looks like, and I can see what a pomegranate flower looks like. And so now I'm just really curious about, like, how does it get from flower to pomegranate to fruit? And, like, are these little cluster of things gonna end up in the fruit? Like, is that what the seeds are in the fruit? So I think I just have a lot more questions about a plant that I thought I knew a fair amount about just from eating it.
Gosh, I feel like that rhythm is always reemerging for me, that especially with the natural world, the more closely I look, the more questions come up. And the more it's like, wait a minute, like, you know, that's how we make sense of the world too, is kind of like make these generalized rules or learn rules for how things might behave. Especially even thinking about that diagram, like, this is what the flower parts are. And then it's like, wait a minute, mine looks really different. Or like Kabir's is like just a bract with like a tiny, tiny flower. If you're saying, well, you know, so like, I just feel like what you're talking about is the reason why I wanted to do this workshop now during quarantine, because I think it's a really difficult time for a lot of people. And for me, as like a lifelong learner, it's been a huge healing thing to develop that like curiosity and to find more and more questions, because it just never stops. You can do research, go on JSTOR, go on Wikipedia, and then it just keeps going. And I'll say, oh, well, I thought I understood, and I will share as well that this isn't about plants, but I've been studying this oleander plant in my neighborhood, and it has milkweed bugs that are swarming it. And so I've just been observing it, and I'm in touch with an entomologist that I went to elementary school with. And I was like, hey, you haven't heard from me in 25 years, but like, what's going on with these milkweed bugs? Because they're cuddling. They're in these puddles. They're in these piles cuddling. And he said, oh, they're resourcing. They're finding resources. And I said, well, but all the resources are diffuse. So then we get in this conversation and say, oh, well, actually, what the scientific knowledge looks different than the way this lived being is behaving in my space. And this is how scientists develop the field, is people saying, wait a minute, I thought a flower had this structure, Kabir said, but I'm just seeing this one thing. And like, how did that evolve? Or, having these questions, I think, is very helpful to the scientific community. It's a long-winded way of saying, yeah. Great.
Actually, quick thing. Have you guys looked up at iNaturalist? If you guys want to identify plants, it's kind of like a citizen science-based thing where you take a picture of a plant and scientists identifies it for you.
Yeah. I highly recommend that app. It's really important because not only do you learn from this app, but you are contributing to the scientific mapping of species and climate change. So I'm a huge proponent of iNaturalist, big fan. It's a really helpful tool for learning. In addition, I'm starting a podcast called Into the Field, where I'm interviewing different naturalists. And I just did a whole podcast episode on tech and naturalists. So iNaturalist, I have a friend that does coding where they bring all the iNaturalist data through, so you can go to all these websites she's made, like owls near me. What was the last owl seen near my house, or whatever. So many ways to engage with nature right now.
Cool.
Yeah. Great. So yeah, thanks so much for participating and doing this work with me. And I just think Alice is gonna do the outro and give some contact info, but specifically I would be so excited to hear what you've maybe noticed or things that have shifted when you're looking at plants after, or flowers after doing this,
Great. Well, thank you so, so much, Michelle. As promised, I am going to share this. This is Michelle's contact information, her website, her Instagram, her email, and I think you said that you can check out your podcast on your Instagram, right? So if we went to your Instagram, that's where we'd find information?
Yes, it has not yet dropped.
Fun. Okay.
So if you follow me on Instagram, I will be shifting over and announcing the podcast's new Instagram.
Terrific. And then maybe sort of once, who knows when quarantine will be over, but that's also, your Instagram is a place where we can find Into the Field in person if and when that boosts back up. Is that right?
Yes. And in addition, if you do follow me on Instagram, what I've been doing is every single day I do environmental education stories. So every single day I go into the field and look and talk about what I'm finding. Often it's about botany, sometimes insects. So yeah, be sure to check it out.
Great. So take a picture of this if you want, or write down Michelle's information. But otherwise, follow MESC on Instagram if you're not already. That's kind of the easiest way to stay up to date on these Monday MESCcares programs. And if you, any one of you participants would like to lead a MESCcares program like Michelle did today, they're free to attend, but we will pay you to do them. And if you know anybody who would like to facilitate one as well, please submit a proposal. You can find that information on our bio in our Instagram. That's kind of where it'll live, just easiest. But otherwise, I will stop sharing that. And Carolina also let me know that next week at 11, from 11 to 12 will be our next MESCcares. And Carolina, do you have any more information to share about that?
Yes, it's a Zen doodle meditation with Katie Lipsit. She is a teaching artist at LACMA. And it's basically a doodling work I exercise while meditating on a thought.
Beautiful. So attend that if you'd like. I see Ruben just put in the form for submitting a proposal. Again, if you would like to or know anybody who would, please submit those, because I think we have like 2 more weeks to do it. And we would love to get as many people facilitating as possible. But unless there's anything else, that is it from us. So thank you all so much for participating, and thank you again, Michelle, for facilitating.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Bye all.
So good to see faces.
Bye.
Thanks so much. That was awesome.